Mom? Oh my God, Mom. The billionaire's voice cut through the freezing morning air. His mother leaned against the wall by the mansion gate, barefoot on the snow, held tightly in the arms of a thin black teenager wrapped in a worn-out blanket. Grateful and shaken, the billionaire vows to help him rebuild his life, unaware that this single act of compassion will transform his own in ways he could never imagine. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. William Hartwell's hands trembled as he gripped the leather steering wheel of his Mercedes, the heated seats doing nothing to warm the cold dread spreading through his chest. The private jet had touched down at 5:47 in the morning, earlier than planned. He'd cut the California conference short, driven by a gnawing feeling he couldn't shake. Something about his mother's voice on the phone last night, the confusion, the way she'd called him by his father's name. The December snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, the kind that muffled sound and turned the world into a snow globe. His mansion loomed ahead, all 12,000 square feet of it, dark except for the porch lights he'd left on automatic timer. Home, though lately it felt more like a museum he happened to sleep in. William pressed the remote. The iron gates swung open with their usual mechanical precision. He'd paid $23,000 for those gates. State-of-the-art, secure, safe, or so he'd thought. Then his eyes swept across the property and his blood turned to ice. The pedestrian gate, the small side entrance he'd been meaning to have the security company look at for weeks, hung open, its electronic lock blinking red. Malfunctioned. Failed. Just like everything else he'd trusted to keep his mother safe. Time stopped. His 78-year-old mother, Eleanor Hartwell, was slumped against the stone column of the portico, wearing nothing but her thin cotton nightgown, the blue one with the tiny flowers she'd worn since his father died. Her feet were bare against the frozen marble, her silver hair hung loose around her face, wild and tangled. But she wasn't alone. A young black man, maybe 19 or 20, impossibly thin, wearing a sweater so threadbare William could see the outline of his ribs through it, had wrapped himself around Eleanor like a human shield. His arms encircled her, his body curved over hers. Between them, William could see the corner of what looked like a blanket, gray and moth-eaten, barely big enough to cover a child, let alone two people. Both of them were shaking. Not the normal shiver of cold, but the violent, uncontrollable tremors of bodies shutting down. "Mom?" The scream tore from William's throat before he even realized he'd opened the car door. He ran, his $1,000 shoes slipping on ice, his cashmere coat flying open behind him. "Mom? Oh my God, Mom!" The young man's eyes flickered open, dark brown, bloodshot, barely focused. His lips were blue. His skin had taken on a grayish tinge that William recognized from his EMT training years ago, back when he was still in college, back before the money and the empire and the distance from everything real. Hypothermia. Advanced stage. She was lost, the young man whispered, his voice cracking like breaking ice. Each word seemed to cost him everything. Couldn't leave her. William fell to his knees, pulling his mother into his arms. She was ice cold but breathing. Alive. "Who are you?" William asked the young man, tears streaming down his face. "How long have you been out here?" "All night," the young man said simply, before his eyes rolled back and he collapsed. No. William caught him before he could fall, lowering him gently to the steps while simultaneously reaching for his mother. "Stay with me. Both of you stay with me." His mother's eyes opened, confused, clouded. Lost in the fog of Alzheimer's that had been worsening dramatically over the last 3 years, though she'd been diagnosed long before that. "Richard?" she murmured, using William's father's name. "Is it time for breakfast?" William's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Can you imagine finding your mother like this? Finding out a complete stranger, a homeless young man, had saved her life while you were away on business. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. About 8 hours earlier, Thomas Wheeler had exactly $17.43 to his name when the landlord of the boarding house threw him out. "I've been patient, kid," Mr. Tommy said, not unkindly, "but you're 3 weeks behind on rent. I got a business to run. I have a job interview tomorrow," Thomas pleaded. "At the warehouse, they said they're hiring for the loading docks. If I get it, I can pay you by Friday." Mr. Tommy shook his head. "You've said that before. "I'm sorry, Thomas, I really am, but you gotta go." So Thomas packed his belongings into his backpack, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a toothbrush, a water bottle, and wrapped in plastic at the very bottom, his mother's blanket and the photograph. Everything he owned in the world fit in one bag. He was 19 years old. He'd been on his own since he was 16, when his mother died. 3 years of surviving day by day, doing odd jobs, washing dishes, moving boxes, anything that paid cash under the table because he had no papers, no social security card, no proof he existed beyond his own skin. Thomas stood on the sidewalk outside the boarding house, his breath clouding in the December air, and tried to figure out where to go. The shelter was already full. It always was this time of year, when temperatures dropped into the teens and the cold turned deadly. The warming center downtown wouldn't open until morning, and by then, spots would be gone. He'd shown up too late, again. Thomas stood outside the shelter doors for a moment, watching the red no vacancy light flicker in the icy wind, then turned away. His stomach growled. He'd skipped dinner to save money. The $17.43 in his pocket needed to last until he found more work. He started walking with no destination in mind, just moving to stay warm. His jacket was thin, bought from Goodwill 2 years ago for $5. It had been enough in early autumn, but now, with winter pressing down hard and merciless, it was barely better than nothing. Downtown was still alive with light. People inside restaurants laughing over hot meals, holiday music spilling from the stores, taxis honking in the distance. Office windows glowed with late workers finishing their day. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere, doing something, belonging to someone. Thomas belonged nowhere. He thought about his mother as he walked, thought about her final days in the charity ward of the county hospital, her body ravaged by cancer they couldn't afford to treat. Thought about how she'd gripped his hand with surprising strength and made him promise, "You'll never be poor if you still have kindness," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible over the machines keeping her alive. "Money comes and goes, Tommy, but the person you choose to be, that stays forever. Promise me you'll stay kind, even when the world isn't kind back." "I promise," 16-year-old Thomas had said through his tears. "And promise me something else," his mother had continued. "Don't just survive, baby. Live. Find joy. Find people to love. Build a life worth living." Thomas had promised, but keeping that promise had been harder than he'd imagined. By early evening, Thomas found himself in a wealthy neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. He hadn't meant to come here. He just walked, following one street after another, trying to stay warm, and ended up surrounded by mansions that looked like something from a movie. Stone walls, iron gates, security cameras, houses with more rooms than Thomas could count. He kept his head down and his hands in his pockets. He'd learned early that looking at the big houses too long, pausing in front of the expensive cars, got you labeled as suspicious, and suspicious for a young black man in a wealthy white neighborhood meant police attention he couldn't afford. Thomas was cutting through a side street, trying to navigate back to a part of town where he belonged, when he heard something that made him stop. Crying, faint, confused, frightened crying. An elderly person's voice, thin and wavering. Every instinct told Thomas to keep walking. Getting involved with other people's problems when you looked like he did, when you had no address and no documentation, was dangerous. It was the kind of thing that got you arrested for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the crying continued, and Thomas found his feet moving toward the sound before his brain could override them. The sound was coming from an alley between 2 mansions. Thomas peered into the shadows and saw an elderly woman shuffling along, wearing only a nightgown and slippers. Her silver hair hung loose around her face. She was hugging a picture frame to her chest, the glass cracked, and she was crying softly, lost and confused. "Ma'am," Thomas called out gently, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The woman turned to him, her eyes clouded and unfocused. "I have to find William," she said, her voice trembling. "My son. He's waiting for me at the train station. I'm late. I'm so late." Thomas's heart sank. He recognized the signs. His grandmother had been the same way before she died when he was 10. Alzheimer's. This woman was having an episode. "What's your name, ma'am?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Eleanor," she said, clutching the picture frame tighter. "Eleanor Hartwell." and I need to find William, he'll be worried. Thomas looked around. They were between two massive estates, no houses nearby, no one else on the street. Darkness was falling fast now. Eleanor was wearing only a thin nightgown and house slippers. Her feet must be freezing. Eleanor, Thomas said, do you know where you live? Can you tell me your address? Eleanor's face crumpled. I can't remember. I can't remember where home is. She started crying harder. Why can't I remember? Thomas felt panic rising in his chest. This woman needed help, needed to get home, needed medical attention. He should call 911. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. But Thomas had learned not to trust the police, had learned that when you were homeless and black, interactions with law enforcement rarely went well. And if they found him here with a confused elderly white woman who couldn't explain who he was or why he was helping her, Thomas couldn't risk it. But he also couldn't leave her. Okay, Thomas said, making a decision. Okay, Eleanor, let's figure this out together. Let's walk around and see if anything looks familiar. Maybe we can find your house. Eleanor nodded, still clutching the picture frame. Thomas looked at it. A wedding photo, maybe 40 years old. A young couple smiling, full of hope. Is that you? Thomas asked, pointing to the young woman in the photo. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice softening. That's me and Richard, my husband. We were so young then, so happy. It's a beautiful picture, Thomas said, gently taking the frame from her trembling hands. Let me carry this for you, okay? We'll keep it safe. I bet Richard is worried about you. Let's get you home to him, okay? Eleanor, let him take the frame, seeming relieved to have someone else carry the burden. Thomas tucked it carefully into his backpack for safekeeping. What Thomas didn't know was that Richard had been dead for 10 years. The storm had emptied the streets. Even the dog walkers had stayed inside. Not a single car passed them for hours. They walked slowly up the street, Eleanor leaning on Thomas's arm. She talked as they walked, her conversation wandering through time, mixing past and present, confusing names and places. William is such a good boy, she said. Works so hard, too hard I tell him. But he won't listen, he's always been stubborn. I'm sure he is, Thomas agreed, trying to keep her calm, trying to think of what to do. The temperature was dropping fast. Full darkness had settled over the neighborhood, and the street lights were coming on. Thomas's thin jacket did nothing against the cold. Eleanor's nightgown was even thinner. I'm cold, Eleanor said, shivering. So cold. Thomas stopped walking. He looked at Eleanor, at her bare legs and thin slippers, at the way she shook with cold and confusion. He looked at the darkening sky, and the mansions around them, all locked up tight behind their gates and walls. Then Thomas made a decision that would change his life forever. But when he thought of all the nights no one stopped for him, when the world looked the other way, and for some reason, he couldn't do the same now, he took off his jacket, his only protection against the cold, and wrapped it around Eleanor's shoulders. It hung on her small frame, too big, but it was something. There, Thomas said, trying to sound confident even though he was already starting to shiver. That's better, right? Eleanor looked at him with eyes that suddenly focused, becoming clear for just a moment. You gave me your coat, she said wonderingly. But now you'll be cold. I'll be okay. Thomas lied. I'm tougher than I look. They continued walking, Thomas trying each gate they passed, hoping to recognize Eleanor's house, hoping someone would appear to help. But the street remained empty. These wealthy neighborhoods were like ghost towns. Everyone locked away in their mansions, insulated from the cold and the world. After 20 minutes of walking, Eleanor's legs began to give out. She stumbled, and Thomas caught her, supporting her weight. I'm so tired, Eleanor whispered. Can we rest? Thomas looked around desperately. They were in front of one of the biggest mansions he'd seen, a stone behemoth with columns and tall windows, all dark except for some dim security lights. The gate was closed, but there was a stone wall along the perimeter with an alcove near the entrance, sheltered from the worst of the wind. Okay, Thomas said, let's rest here, just for a minute. He helped Eleanor sit down in the alcove, her back against the stone wall. The ground was freezing, but at least they were out of the wind. Thomas sat next to her, already shivering violently. As he settled down, he noticed something, the faintest hint of warmth rising from a vent near the base of the wall, a heating exhaust. It wasn't much, barely noticeable, but maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to keep them from freezing to death. "Tell me about William," Thomas said, trying to keep Eleanor awake, trying to keep her talking. "What's he like?" "He's wonderful," Eleanor said, her voice dreamy. "So smart, built a company from nothing. But I worry about him. He works too much, doesn't take time for himself, doesn't remember what matters." "What matters?" Thomas asked, his teeth chattering. "People," Eleanor said simply. "Love, connection. That's all that really matters in the end." Thomas pulled his backpack around and dug through it with numb fingers. At the bottom, wrapped in plastic, was his mother's blanket. The last piece of her he had. Thin, worn, full of holes, but it had been hers. It smelled like her, like home, like everything he'd lost. Thomas had sworn he'd never give this blanket away. It was all he had left of his mother, but looking at Eleanor, shivering and confused and so fragile, Thomas knew what he had to do. He pulled out the blanket and wrapped it around both of them, pulling Eleanor close to his side. She was so small, so frail. Her body shook against his. "What's this?" Eleanor asked, touching the blanket. "It was my mother's," Thomas said. "She died 3 years ago. This blanket is all I have left of her." "Oh," Eleanor said softly. "Then you shouldn't waste it on me." "It's not wasted," Thomas said firmly. "My mom would want me to use it to help someone. She was like that. She believed in taking care of people." "She sounds like a good woman," Eleanor murmured. "She was the best," Thomas whispered. That thin ribbon of warmth from the exhaust vent kept them barely above fatal temperatures. They sat huddled together as the temperature plummeted. Thomas had checked his watch earlier. It was 7:15 p.m. The night was going to be long and brutal. Thomas tried to remember everything he'd learned about surviving cold nights. Keep moving to maintain circulation. Don't fall asleep. Stay awake no matter what. Share body heat. But this was different. This was dangerous cold, deadly cold, and he had no shelter, no real protection, and a confused elderly woman who depended on him. "Tell me about your mother," Eleanor said, after a while, her voice weak but curious. So Thomas talked. He told Eleanor about his mother's laugh, which was loud and joyful and could light up a room, about how she sang while she cooked, even though she couldn't carry a tune, about how she worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed, but always made time to help him with homework, to ask about his day, to show him he mattered. "She sounds wonderful," Eleanor said. "She was," Thomas said. "She taught me that being poor doesn't mean being unkind, that you can lose everything material and still be rich if you have a good heart." "She was right," Eleanor said. Then her eyes drifted, losing focus again. "Is Richard coming?" "He's supposed to pick me up from Mother's house. He'll be here soon," Thomas said, even though he was beginning to suspect Richard was gone, like his own mother was gone. The hours crawled by. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Thomas talked continuously, telling Eleanor stories, asking her questions, anything to keep her awake. She drifted in and out of lucidity, sometimes calling him William, sometimes asking for her husband, sometimes clear and present. During one clear moment, around 11 o'clock, Eleanor looked at Thomas with focused eyes. "You're freezing," she said, her voice sharp with concern. "You're going to die out here trying to save me." "No, I'm not," Thomas said, though his body had stopped shivering, which he knew was a very bad sign. "We're going to make it through the night, both of us." "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor asked. "You don't even know me. You could leave. You could save yourself." Thomas thought about that, thought about his mother's words, thought about the promise he'd made. "Because someone needed help," Thomas said simply. "And I was there. That's reason enough." Eleanor reached out with a shaking hand and touched his face. "Your mother raised you right," she whispered. "She'd be so proud of you." Thomas felt tears freeze on his cheeks. By midnight, Thomas was losing his fight against hypothermia. His thoughts were scattered and confused, his vision blurred, his body felt heavy and distant, like it belonged to someone else. But he kept his arms around Eleanor, kept the blanket wrapped around them both, kept his body between her and the worst of the cold. "Thomas," Eleanor's voice seemed to come from very far away. are you still there? Still here, Thomas mumbled, forcing the words through numb lips. Don't leave me, Eleanor said, and she sounded scared like a child. Please don't leave me alone. Never, Thomas promised. I'm not going anywhere. Around 2 a.m., Thomas stopped being able to feel his hands or feet. His core temperature had dropped dangerously low. He knew in the part of his brain that could still think clearly that he was dying, but Eleanor was still alive, still breathing, still warm against his body. That was enough. That had to be enough. Thomas thought about his mother, about her smile, and her laugh, and the way she used to tuck him in at night. He thought about what she'd said about staying kind, even when the world wasn't kind back. I kept my promise, Mom. Thomas whispered into the darkness. I stayed kind, right to the end. Eleanor stirred against him. Who are you talking to? My mother, Thomas said, telling her I love her. Tell mine I love her too, Eleanor said, her voice dreamy. And my Richard, and my William. Tell them all I love them. I will, Thomas promised, even though he was pretty sure they were both going to die here, frozen on the steps of this mansion, two lost souls who'd found each other at the end. The snow started falling around 3 a.m., big heavy flakes that accumulated quickly, covering them in white, like a frozen blanket. Thomas's consciousness faded in and out. One moment he was aware of the cold, and Eleanor's weight against him. The next moment he was somewhere warm, somewhere safe, and his mother was there, smiling at him, telling him everything would be okay. Just a little longer, Thomas told himself when he came back to awareness. Just hold on a little longer. But he didn't know if Eleanor's son was even coming. Didn't know if anyone would find them. Didn't know if he'd wake up again, or if the next time he closed his eyes would be the last time. All he knew was that he wasn't going to let go, wasn't going to leave Eleanor alone, wasn't going to break his promise to stay. At 5:47 a.m., headlights swept across the steps. Thomas tried to open his eyes, but they felt frozen shut. He heard a car door slam, heard footsteps running, heard someone screaming, "Mom! Oh my God, Mom!" Thomas forced his eyes open, just barely. A man was running toward them, tall, wearing an expensive coat, his face twisted with horror and fear. Eleanor. This must be Eleanor's son, William. Thomas tried to speak, tried to explain, but his voice wouldn't work. He gathered every bit of strength he had left, and pushed the words out. She was lost, Thomas whispered. I couldn't leave her. And then everything went dark. Thomas woke up to warmth, real deep, penetrating warmth that hurt almost as much as the cold had. He was in a bed with heavy blankets. An IV dripped slowly into his arm. Monitors beeped steadily beside him. Hospital. A nurse appeared in his field of vision, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. Welcome back, she said softly. You gave us quite a scare, young man. Eleanor, Thomas croaked, his throat raw. Is she, Mrs. Hartwell is fine, the nurse said, smiling. Mild hypothermia, but she's going to be perfectly okay. Thanks to you. Her eyes filled with tears. You saved her life, sweetheart. You almost died doing it, but you saved her life. Your body heat kept her core temperature barely above fatal levels. It a miracle of timing. Thomas felt something release in his chest. She was alive. Eleanor was alive. That was all that mattered. How long? Thomas asked. You've been here for about 3 hours, the nurse said. Your core temperature was down to 90.2 degrees when you came in. Another hour, and she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The door opened, and a man walked in, the same man from the steps, Eleanor's son. Up close, William Hartwell looked younger than Thomas had thought. Maybe late 40s, with dark hair and eyes red from crying. Behind him stood 2 police officers, a man and a woman, both in uniform. Thomas's stomach tightened. Here it came, the questions, the suspicion, the assumption that he must have done something wrong. The woman stepped forward. She was African American, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes that softened her official tone. I'm Detective Patricia Moore, she said. And this is Officer James Rodriguez. We just need to understand what happened, son. You're not in trouble. Thomas sat up slowly,
wincing at the ache that shot through his ribs. He had nothing to hide. "I was walking yesterday evening," he began hoarsely. "I'd been evicted from my boarding house, had nowhere to go. I was just trying to stay warm. Just after sunset, I heard someone crying. I found Mrs. Hartwell in an alley between houses, confused, barefoot, wearing only a nightgown. She was holding a picture frame, her wedding photo." William's breath caught in his throat. "She said she needed to find her son, William, that he was waiting at the train station," Thomas went on. "She didn't know where she lived, couldn't remember her address. She was freezing, so I gave her my jacket. I took her wedding picture and put it in my backpack so she wouldn't drop it." "You gave her your only jacket?" William asked quietly, looking at the cracked picture frame, now sitting on the bedside table, the one the hospital staff had retrieved from Thomas's belongings. Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir. She needed it more than me. We tried to find her home, but she couldn't remember which house it was. It was getting dark, colder. She was tired, so I found a spot near your gate, out of the wind, and we sat down to rest." "For 8 hours, William said. "You sat there for 8 hours in 15-degree weather?" "Yes, sir," Thomas replied. "I gave her my mother's blanket. It's all I had left of her. I just wanted to keep Mrs. Hartwell warm, keep her talking, so she wouldn't fall asleep." Detective Moore scribbled notes. "She never gave you her address?" "No, ma'am. She kept asking for her husband, talking about her son, but she couldn't remember home." "Why didn't you call for help?" Officer Carter asked, his tone curious but not harsh. Thomas hesitated. The answer lived deep inside him, buried under years of watching how the world really worked. He swallowed hard. "Because I've seen what happens when people like me try to help." William frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Thomas's eyes drifted to the window. The snow outside blurred into memory. He was 16 again, standing under a flickering streetlight on the south side. A man had collapsed on the sidewalk, drunk maybe, or hurt. Thomas had run to him, shaking his shoulder, calling for help. By the time the police arrived, people were pointing at him, shouting that he tried to rob the man. They saw a skinny black kid, kneeling over a white man's wallet on the ground, and that was enough.
"I tried to help," Thomas said quietly. "They handcuffed me, didn't listen. It took the man waking up and saying I didn't touch him before they let me go." He looked back at them now. "So when I found her, Mrs. Hartwell, I thought if I called they'd see me with an old white lady in her nightgown and think the same thing. I didn't want to make things worse for her, or for me." His voice cracked. "I just wanted to keep her safe." Detective Moore's pen stilled. William's face softened, his jaw trembling as he whispered, "My God." William turned away, shoulders shaking. "Sir," Thomas said quietly, "did I do something wrong? I swear, I was only trying to help." William turned back, eyes wet. "No, Thomas, you did everything right, everything I failed to do." He moved closer to the bed. "I watched the security footage, every minute of it. I saw you give her your jacket, your blanket. I saw you wrap your arms around her to keep her warm. You were dying to save my mother. I couldn't leave her," Thomas said simply. "She needed someone." William's voice broke. "My mother has Alzheimer's. She was diagnosed years ago, but the symptoms have gotten dramatically worse over the last 3 years. I hired people, built systems, everything except being here. And while I was away on business, she walked out in the middle of the night. The staff were asleep. The pedestrian gate's security lock malfunctioned. I'd been meaning to get it fixed for weeks. She could have died, Thomas." He took a breath. "But she didn't, because you were there." Thomas looked down, unable to speak. Detective Moore closed her notebook. "Mr. Hartwell, the report will show he saved her life. We'll file it that way." She gave Thomas a small respectful nod. "You did a good thing, son." Then she and Officer Carter quietly stepped out, leaving the two men alone. William stayed silent for a moment, staring out the hospital window at the snow still falling. Then he turned. "Do you have somewhere to go when they release you?" Thomas shook his head. "No, sir. I'll figure something out." "You'll come stay with us," William said firmly. Thomas blinked. "Sir, you saved my mother's life. You're not sleeping on the streets after that. I have a guest house behind the property. It's warm, safe, private. You can stay there until you get back on your feet." "I can't accept that." Thomas whispered. You don't even know me. William smiled sadly. I know enough. You gave everything you had for a stranger. That tells me who you are. Thomas stared at him, unsure whether to cry or laugh. Just for a few days then. For as long as you need, William said. Maybe longer. The snow kept falling outside the hospital window, soft and endless, covering the city in quiet white. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. William stood beside the bed, and Thomas, weak, exhausted, still half frozen, felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. Trust. When the nurses came to check his vitals, William was still there. He didn't leave that night, or the next. Days turned into weeks, recovery into something like belonging. Weeks later, Thomas was coming home. William's mansion looked different in daylight, less intimidating, almost welcoming. As they pulled through the gates in William's Mercedes, Thomas saw the spot where he'd spent that terrible night. The alcove where he had wrapped his body around Eleanor. The steps where he had nearly died. What's that? Thomas asked. A reminder, William said quietly, of what matters, of what you taught us. They pulled into the circular driveway. The front door opened, and a little girl came running out. Maybe 10 or 11 years old, with blonde hair and pigtails and bright blue eyes. Is this him? She asked excitedly, bouncing on her toes. Is this Thomas? Lily, William said, his voice warm with love. Let him get out of the car first. Thomas climbed out, feeling awkward and out of place in his borrowed hospital clothes. Lily stared up at him with open curiosity. You saved Grandma Eleanor, Lily said. You're a hero. I'm not a hero, Thomas said, uncomfortable with the word. I just did what anyone would do. No, a voice said from the doorway. Eleanor stood there, leaning on a walker, her eyes clearer than they'd been that terrible night. You did what most people wouldn't do. That's exactly what makes you a hero. She shuffled forward slowly, and Thomas met her halfway, taking her frail hand in his. Thank you, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. Thank you for staying with me, for not leaving me alone. I couldn't leave you, Thomas said simply. You needed help. Eleanor patted his cheek with her free hand. You're a good boy. Your mother raised you right. The mention of his mother made Thomas's throat tight. Inside, the mansion was overwhelming. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art on the walls that probably cost more than his mother had made in her entire life. Thomas felt like he was in a museum, not a home. I know it's a lot, William said, noticing Thomas's expression. We can make changes, make it feel more like a home and less like a showplace. That's something I've been meaning to do anyway. A woman appeared from one of the side rooms, Patricia, the housekeeper Thomas had heard about. Middle-aged with kind eyes and a warm smile. You must be Thomas, she said. Welcome home. I've prepared a room for you upstairs. Let me show you. Thomas followed her up a sweeping staircase, Lily trailing behind them, chattering about the house and her school and her cat, Mr. Whiskers. This will be your room, Patricia said, opening a door. Thomas stepped inside and stopped, overwhelmed. The room was huge, bigger than the entire apartment he'd shared with his mother. A 4-poster bed with a thick comforter, a desk by the window, a bookshelf, a dresser, a door that led to a private bathroom. It's too much, Thomas whispered. It's yours, Patricia said firmly. All of it. Mr. Hartwell had me stock the closet with clothes in your size. The bathroom has everything you need. If there's anything else you want, just let me know. After Patricia left, Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, afraid to disturb it. The mattress was soft, the room smelled clean, everything was perfect. Too perfect. Thomas pulled his backpack onto the bed, his only possession, and carefully took out his mother's photograph, the harmonica she'd given him for his 16th birthday, and the now empty plastic bag that had protected her blanket. He placed the photo and harmonica on the nightstand, the only things in this perfect room that felt like they belonged to him. A knock on the door made him turn. Lily poked her head in. Can I come in? She asked. It's your house, Thomas said. It's your house too now, Lily said, coming in and climbing onto the end of his bed. Daddy says you're going to live with us, like forever. If that's okay with you, Thomas said. It's more than okay, Lily said. I always wanted a brother. All my friends have brothers or sisters, but it's just been me and Daddy and Grandma Eleanor. And Daddy's always working and Grandma Eleanor gets confused a lot, and sometimes I get really lonely in this big house. She looked at Thomas hopefully. Do you think you'll like living here? Thomas thought about sleeping on park benches, about being cold and hungry and scared, about having nowhere to belong. Yeah, he said honestly. I think I will. Good, Lily said beaming. Want to meet Mr. Whiskers? That first night, they had dinner together in the formal dining room, William at the head of the table, Eleanor at the foot, Lily on one side and Thomas across from her. Patricia served pot roast with vegetables, and the smell made Thomas's stomach growl so loudly that Lily giggled. Don't be shy, William said, passing him the serving dishes. Take as much as you want. Thomas filled his plate, trying not to take too much, trying to remember table manners. He was hyper-aware of every movement, every sound he made. He didn't belong here, anyone could see that. But when he looked up, William was watching him with an expression that wasn't judgment or pity. It was something else, something like pride. Tell me about yourself, Thomas, William said. What do you like to do? What are you interested in? Thomas had been surviving for so long, he couldn't remember what he liked. I used to like reading, he said slowly. Before, when I was in school, I liked history and English, and I played harmonica a little. My mom gave me one for my 16th birthday, right before he couldn't finish. We have a library, Lily said excitedly. A whole room full of books. You can read anything you want, and I'd like to hear you play harmonica sometime, William said. When you're ready. Eleanor, who had been eating quietly, suddenly looked up at Thomas with focused eyes. What was your mother's name? She asked. Sarah, Thomas said. Sarah Wheeler. Sarah, Eleanor repeated. That's a beautiful name. She must have been a remarkable woman to raise such a kind son. She was, Thomas said, his voice thick. She really was. After dinner, Thomas excused himself and went back to his room. He sat on the edge of the too-soft bed and pulled out his harmonica, the one his mother had given him just weeks before she died. He hadn't played it since her funeral. It hurt too much. But tonight, he brought it to his lips and played the song his mother had loved. Amazing Grace, simple and sweet. When he finished, he found Lily standing in his doorway, tears on her face. That was beautiful, she whispered. My mom used to sing that song before she got sick. Thomas patted the bed beside him, and Lily came and sat down. Tell me about her, Thomas said. So Lily told him about her mother, about her laugh and her love of baking and the way she used to dance around the kitchen, about how cancer had taken her when Lily was only 5. I don't remember her as well as I want to, Lily said sadly. Sometimes I'm scared I'm forgetting her face. You won't forget, Thomas said. Not the important stuff, not how she made you feel. Do you still remember your mom? Lily asked. Every day, Thomas said. Every single day. They sat together in comfortable silence, two kids who'd lost their mothers, who understood each other in a way most people couldn't. The first week was the hardest. Thomas kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for William to change his mind, for someone to realize this was all a mistake. He barely touched anything in his room. He made his bed every morning with military precision. He ate sparingly at meals, afraid of taking too much. He moved through the mansion like a ghost, trying not to disturb anything, trying not to leave a mark. On the 5th day, William found him in the library, reading a history book but afraid to take it off the shelf. Thomas, William said, sitting down across from him. We need to talk. Thomas's heart sank. Here it came. The dismissal. The realization that this had been a mistake. This isn't working, William continued. Thomas nodded, trying not to cry. I understand. I can be packed in 5 minutes. I won't. What? William interrupted, confused. No, that's not what I meant. He ran his hand through his hair. I mean, you being afraid to live here isn't working. You're tiptoeing around like you're a guest, like you're going to be kicked out at any moment. I don't want to be a burden, Thomas said quietly. You're not a burden, William said firmly. Your family, this is your home, and I need you to start acting like it. He stood up and pulled books off the shelf, stacking them on the table. Take these to your room, read them. Dog-ear the pages if you want. Spill coffee on them. They're just books. They're meant to be used. He gestured around the library. Everything in this house is meant to be used, not preserved, not worshipped, used. William sat back down, his expression softer. "I've been thinking about what you said in court, about wanting to stop surviving and start living. That's what I want for you too. But you can't do that if you're constantly afraid I'm going to send you away." "How do I know you won't?" Thomas asked, voicing his deepest fear. "Because I'm starting the guardianship paperwork tomorrow," William said. "Because I'm enrolling you in school. Because I'm putting your name on a bank account. I've already hired a lawyer to help recover your birth certificate and get you proper documentation. Because I'm making you legally, officially, permanently part of this family." He leaned forward. "Thomas, I'm not your foster parent. I'm not someone who took you in for money, or because it looked good. I'm someone who wants you here, who needs you here. You saved my mother's life. You reminded me what matters. You showed my daughter what real courage looks like." William's voice cracked. "You gave me my family back. Let me give you one in return." Thomas felt tears streaming down his face. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be part of a family anymore." "Then we'll figure it out together," William said. "All of us. We'll make mistakes, we'll have rough days, but we'll do it together. That's what family means." After that conversation, things started to shift. Thomas began taking books to his room. He started eating normal portions at meals. He laughed at Lily's jokes. He helped Eleanor on her bad days, reading to her, sitting with her, keeping her company. And slowly the mansion started to feel less like a museum and more like a home. 2 weeks after moving in, William sat Thomas down with a stack of papers. "I've been doing some research," William said. "You're 19, but you never finished high school. I'd like to get you a tutor to help you study for your GED. Once you pass that, you can enroll in community college. Maybe eventually transfer to a 4-year university, if that's what you want." Thomas stared at the papers. GED study guides, college brochures, information about financial aid. "You're serious," Thomas said. "About school?" "Completely serious," William said. "Your mother wanted you to finish your education. Let's make that happen." "I don't know if I'm smart enough anymore," Thomas admitted. "It's been 3 years. I've forgotten so much." "Then you'll relearn it," William said simply. "You're one of the smartest people I've met, Thomas. You survived 3 years on the streets. You figured out how to stay alive in impossible conditions. If you can do that, you can pass a test." The tutor arrived the next week. Mr. Rodriguez was a retired teacher, maybe 65, with kind eyes and endless patience. "Let's see where you are," Mr. Rodriguez said, during their first session, handing Thomas a practice test. Thomas struggled through it, feeling stupid and inadequate with every question he couldn't answer. When Mr. Rodriguez scored it, Thomas had barely passed 2 of the 4 sections. "It's okay," Mr. Rodriguez said, seeing Thomas's devastation. "This is just the starting point. We've got time." So they worked, every morning at 6 a.m. Before William left for work, and Lily left for school, Thomas sat at the kitchen table with his books. Math problems that made his head hurt, science concepts he'd never learned, history he'd forgotten, reading comprehension that seemed impossible. Some days he wanted to quit, wanted to say it was too hard, too much, too late. On one of those days, Eleanor found him in the library, surrounded by failed practice tests, his head in his hands. She was having a good day, one of her increasingly rare moments of clarity. "You look troubled, young man," she said, sitting down beside him with some effort. "I'm not smart enough," Thomas said. "I'm going to fail this test and disappoint everyone." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she took his hand in her frail, spotted one. "My husband, William's father, he used to say something I've never forgotten," Eleanor said. "He said that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about being terrified, and doing it anyway." She squeezed his hand. "You've been courageous your whole life, Thomas, surviving what you survived, staying kind when the world was cruel, saving an old woman you didn't even know. This test, this is just one more thing you'll be brave enough to face." "What if I fail?" Thomas whispered. "Then you try again," Eleanor said simply. "Failure isn't falling down, failure is staying down. And you, my dear boy, have never stayed down in your life." Her eyes started to cloud again, drifting back to confusion. but her words stayed with Thomas. The GED test was scheduled for a Monday in late April. Thomas woke up that morning sick with nerves. He couldn't eat breakfast. His hands shook as he got dressed. William drove him to the testing center, and before Thomas got out of the car, William put a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens today," William said, "I'm proud of you. You've worked harder than anyone I know. That's success, regardless of what some test says." The test took 4.5 hours. Math, science, language arts, social studies. Some questions Thomas knew immediately. Strategies Mr. Rodriguez had drilled into him clicking into place. Others he had to work through carefully. Some he guessed on, hoping for the best. When it was over, Thomas felt numb, hollow. He had no idea if he'd passed or failed. Results would come in 6 weeks. 6 weeks of waiting. 6 weeks of waking up at 3 a.m., in a cold sweat, convinced he'd failed. 6 weeks of trying not to think about what failure would mean. But during those 6 weeks, something else was happening. Something Thomas didn't fully recognize at first. The house was changing. William started coming home earlier, having dinner with them every night, instead of working until 9 or 10. He played board games with Lily. He sat with Eleanor talking to her about memories, about his father, about the past. One evening, William found Thomas in the library, and sat down with a heavy sigh. "I hired a new CEO," William said. "Someone I trust to handle the day-to-day operations of the company." "Why?" Thomas asked, surprised. "Because I realized something," William said. "That night, when you gave everything you had to save my mother, you showed me what I'd lost. I'd been so busy building an empire, that I forgot to build a life. I'd been so focused on success, that I forgot what success actually means." He looked at Thomas. "It means having people you love, being there for them. Not just providing for them financially, but actually being present. You reminded me of that. You gave me my family back." "I didn't do anything special," Thomas protested. "That's exactly what made it special," William said. "To you it wasn't even a question. Someone needed help. You helped. Simple as that." "But it's not simple, Thomas. Most people walk away. Most people protect themselves first. You didn't. And that changed everything." On a Thursday in early May, the envelope came. Thomas stood in the kitchen, staring at it. The return address was the State Department of Education. Inside was either his GED certificate, or a failure notice telling him he'd have to try again. His hands shook so badly he couldn't open it. Lily appeared at his elbow. "Want me to do it?" she asked. "No," Thomas said. "I need to. He took a breath. "I'm really scared." "I know," Lily said. "But remember what you told Grandma Eleanor that night, that everything would be okay. You promised." Thomas smiled despite his fear. "Using my own words against me." "Yep," Lily said, grinning. Thomas tore open the envelope with shaking hands. He'd passed. Not just passed, scored in the 93rd percentile overall. 97% in reading. 94 in social studies. 89 in science. 88 in math. "I did it," Thomas whispered, staring at the certificate with his name on it. "Thomas Wheeler. I actually did it." "You did it," Lily screamed, jumping up and down. "You did it, you did it, you did it." William came running from his office. "What happened? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face. "Everything's right. I passed. I'm going to college." William pulled him into a tight hug, and Thomas realized it was the first time he'd been hugged by a father figure since his own father had left before he was born. "I never doubted you," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for 1 second. That night, they celebrated. Patricia made pot roast, Thomas's favorite. Eleanor, having one of her clear evenings, raised a glass of sparkling cider. To Thomas, she said, her voice strong and proud, who reminds us all what it means to be brave, what it means to be kind, what it means to be human." To Thomas everyone echoed, and Thomas, looking around the table at these people who'd become his family, felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Not just hope, not just safety, joy. Summer semester at the community college started in June.
Thomas chose social work as his major without hesitation. He wanted to help kids like him. Kids who'd fallen through the cracks. Kids who needed someone to see them. His first class was Introduction to Social Services, taught by Professor Dr. Sarah Reed. She was tough, demanding, and saw through any excuses. After the third class, she asked Thomas to stay behind. "I read your admissions essay," she said, "about being homeless, about saving Eleanor Hartwell." Thomas tensed, waiting for judgment or pity. "I was homeless too," Dr. Reed said. "When I was 18, got kicked out when I came out as gay, lived in my car for almost a year." She smiled, and Thomas saw understanding in her eyes. "Someone helped me, a librarian who saw me sleeping in my car in the library parking lot, and refused to look away. She helped me find housing, helped me apply for college, helped me build a life." Dr. Reed leaned forward. "You have a gift, Thomas. The ability to see pain in others, because you've felt it yourself. That empathy, born from lived experience, is what makes truly great social workers." "I want to help people," Thomas said. "Kids especially. I want to be the person who doesn't walk away." "Then you're in exactly the right place," Dr. Reed said. Thomas threw himself into his studies with an intensity that surprised even him. He was the first one in class, the last one to leave. He read every assignment twice, participated in every discussion, volunteered for every project. His classmates noticed. "How do you stay so focused?" asked Maya, a girl who sat next to him in social problems class. "Don't you ever just want to, I don't know, take a break, have fun?" Thomas thought about cold nights on park benches, about hunger that made his stomach cramp, about the fear that never quite went away, even now. "I remember what it cost to get here," Thomas said simply. "I'm not wasting this chance." At home life settled into a rhythm that felt more and more like normal. Thomas helped Lily with her homework every evening. He sat with Eleanor on her bad days, when she didn't recognize anyone, reading to her from her favorite books, mostly Jane Austen and poetry. He had real conversations with William about philosophy and ethics, and what it means to live a good life. One evening in September, almost a year after that terrible night, William came home with news. "I'm starting a foundation," he said over dinner. "The Eleanor Hartwell Foundation for Homeless Youth. It'll provide housing, education support, job training, and mental health services for young people aging out of foster care or living on the streets." He looked at Thomas. "I want you to be involved. Your perspective, your lived experience, it's invaluable. Would you consider joining the advisory board?" Thomas felt overwhelmed. "I'm just a college student. I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know the most important thing," William said. "You know what it's like. You understand it in a way I never could. No matter how much research I do, that's exactly what we need." So Thomas joined the board. At 20 years old, by far the youngest member, he sat in meetings with business people, and philanthropists, and non-profit directors, and told them hard truths. "It's not enough to give people a bed for the night," Thomas said, at one board meeting. "They need dignity. They need to be seen as people, not problems. They need structure, yes, but also freedom. They need support, but also the space to make their own choices. And most of all, they need someone to believe in them when they've stopped believing in themselves." The foundation launched in January with a pilot shelter specifically for young adults ages 18 to 24. They provided not just housing, but wraparound services, education support, job training, mental health counseling, life skills classes, and most importantly, staff who genuinely cared. Thomas volunteered there 3 times a week, even with his full college schedule. He couldn't stay away. These were his people. One cold February evening, Thomas was working the dinner shift when a kid came in, maybe 17, thin and wary, wearing clothes too light for winter, with eyes that had seen too much. The kid reminded Thomas of himself. "First time here?" Thomas asked gently. The kid nodded, not meeting his eyes, shoulders hunched defensively. "I'm Thomas. Want some food? We've got chicken and rice tonight. Real food, not shelter slop." The kid's stomach growled audibly, betraying his hunger. Yeah, okay. Thomas got him a tray loaded with food: chicken, rice, vegetables, salad, bread and apple pie. The kid stared at it like it might disappear. It's yours, Thomas said. All of it. Take your time. As the kid ate like he was starving, which he probably was, Thomas sat down across from him. I was homeless too, Thomas said quietly. For almost 3 years. I know how hard it is, how scary, how exhausting, how every single day is just about surviving until tomorrow. The kid looked up, searching Thomas's face, finding no pity, no judgment, just understanding. He relaxed slightly. How'd you get out? The kid asked. So Thomas told him. Not the sanitized version that appeared in the news articles, not the feel-good story that made donors open their wallets. The real version. The fear, the cold, the hunger, the choice to help an old woman even when it cost him everything. The thing is, Thomas said, I didn't know that night would change my life. I just knew someone needed help, and I was there. Sometimes that's all it takes. Being there, being willing, being kind even when it's hard. The kid was quiet, absorbing this. Can I stay here tonight? He finally asked. In the shelter? Absolutely, Thomas said. And tomorrow if you want we can talk about next steps. School, job training, whatever you need. He paused. You don't have to do this alone anymore. The kid's eyes filled with tears. I've been alone for so long. I know, Thomas said, his throat tight with remembered pain. I know exactly how that feels, but not anymore. We've got you now. Eleanor's Alzheimer's progressed steadily through Thomas's second year of college. The clear days became fewer and farther between. The confusion became deeper. The woman who'd been so sharp, so present, slowly faded into a fog that never quite lifted. But Thomas sat with her anyway. Every evening when he got home from class or the shelter, he'd find Eleanor in her room or in her chair by the library window, and he'd sit with her. Sometimes he read to her. Sometimes he just held her hand. Sometimes she thought he was William's father, Richard. Sometimes she thought he was her own son as a young man. Sometimes she didn't know who he was at all. It didn't matter. Thomas stayed anyway. You're a good boy, Eleanor would say on her clearer moments, patting his hand. Your mother raised you right. Thank you, Gran. Thomas would say and mean it. He'd started calling her Gran naturally, without thinking about it. She was his grandmother now, in every way that mattered. One evening in July, as Thomas sat reading to her from Pride and Prejudice, her favorite, Eleanor suddenly gripped his hand with surprising strength. Thomas, she said, her voice clearer than it had been in weeks, I need to tell you something.
I'm here, Gran, Thomas said, putting down the book. That night, Eleanor said, the night you found me, I wasn't really lost. Thomas frowned, confused. What do you mean? I mean, part of me knew I was outside. Part of me knew it was cold. Part of me knew I should go back inside. Her eyes focused on him with startling clarity. But I was so tired, Thomas, so tired of being confused, so tired of not recognizing my own son, so tired of losing myself piece by piece. Thomas felt his heart break. I thought maybe if I just stayed out there, Eleanor continued, it would end, peacefully, in the cold, just falling asleep and not waking up. Gran, Thomas whispered, tears streaming down his face. But then you came, Eleanor said, squeezing his hand, this young man who had nothing, who was suffering himself, and you didn't walk away, you stayed, you kept me warm, you kept me alive. She smiled. You reminded me that life is worth living, even when it's hard, even when you're losing yourself, because there are still people worth living for. She touched his face gently. You saved me in more ways than you know, Thomas, and I want you to know something. I may not always remember your name, I may not always know who you are, but somewhere deep inside, where the disease can't reach, I know you, and I love you, like you're my own grandson. I love you too, Gran, Thomas said, his voice breaking. Eleanor's eyes started to cloud again, the moment of clarity fading. Is it time for tea? She asked, confused again. Yes, Thomas said, wiping his eyes. It's time for tea. 3 weeks later, on a quiet August morning, Eleanor passed away in her sleep. William found her at dawn, lying peacefully in her bed, her hands folded over her chest, a small smile on her face. She looked at rest, finally at peace. The funeral was huge, hundreds of people whose lives Eleanor had touched over her 78 years. But the moment Thomas would always remember was standing at the graveside, Lily on one side of him and William on the other, saying goodbye to the woman who'd given him a family. The headstone was simple: Eleanor Margaret Hartwell, beloved wife, mother and grandmother, and below that a line William had chosen: she taught us that home is where someone waits for you. After the service, after everyone else had left, Thomas stayed. He knelt by the fresh grave and pulled out his harmonica. He played Amazing Grace, the song his mother had loved, the song Eleanor had loved too. He played it for both of them, these two women who'd shaped him, who'd loved him, who'd taught him what it meant to be human. When he finished, Lily was standing behind him, tears streaming down her face. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "She deserved beautiful," Thomas said. That fall, Thomas started his third year of college. The Eleanor Hartwell Foundation opened 2 more shelters and expanded their services. They'd helped over 200 young people in their first year of operation. William threw himself into the foundation work with an intensity that Thomas recognized, grief channeled into purpose. They worked side by side, William handling the business and fundraising aspects, Thomas providing insight and direct service. One evening in November, almost 2 years after that terrible night, Thomas and William were in William's office reviewing grant applications. "Look at this one," William said, handing Thomas a file. "Kid aged out of foster care at 18. Been living in his car for 6 months. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?" Thomas read the application. The story was heartbreakingly similar to his own. "Let's bring him in," Thomas said. "Get him into housing, into our GED program. Help him figure out next steps." "Done," William said, making a note. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then William said something that had clearly been on his mind. "You know what haunts me?" William asked. Thomas looked up. "That I almost lost everything," William continued. "My mother could have died that night, and it would have been my fault, because I was too busy, too focused on work, too sure that money and staff could replace actually being present." He looked at Thomas. "You gave me a second chance, a chance to be the son my mother deserved, to be the father Lily deserves, to be the person I should have been all along." "You're a good father," Thomas said. "A good person." "I'm trying to be," William said. "Because of you, because you showed me what it looks like to give everything you have for someone else, to sacrifice without expecting anything in return." He smiled. "You know what my mother said to me, a few days before she died, during one of her clear moments?" Thomas shook his head. "She said Thomas didn't just save my life, William. He saved all of us. He reminded us what love looks like." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "She was right," William said. "You did save us, all of us." By his 4th year of college, Thomas had become something of a campus figure, not famous exactly, but known. The guy who'd been homeless, the guy who'd saved the old woman, the guy who actually cared. Students sought him out, told him their problems, asked for advice, and Thomas, who'd once been invisible, who'd once been nothing, listened, really listened, and helped when he could. He started a support group for students who'd experienced homelessness or foster care, a safe space to talk about trauma, to share resources, to remind each other they weren't alone. The group met every Wednesday evening in the student union. Sometimes 5 people came, sometimes 20, but they always came. These students who'd survived impossible things, drawn together by shared experience and Thomas's quiet leadership. "I don't know how you do it," Maya said one day after a particularly emotional group session. "How you hold all that pain and keep going." Thomas thought about that, about his mother's words, about Eleanor's example, about every person who'd helped him along the way. "I don't hold it," Thomas said. "I carry it." There's a difference. Holding means keeping it to yourself, letting it weigh you down. Carrying means using it to understand others, to help them with their own burdens. He smiled. "My mom used to say that pain doesn't have to be wasted. It can be transformed into compassion, into action, into change." In the spring of his 4th year, Thomas was invited to speak at a conference on homelessness in Washington, D.C. He almost said no. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people, of sharing his story on such a big stage, terrified him. But William convinced him. "Your story matters," William said. "Your voice matters." These people need to hear from someone who's lived it, not just studied it. So Thomas went. The conference was huge. Policymakers, non-profit directors, researchers, advocates, all gathered to discuss solutions to homelessness. Thomas sat through panels and presentations, listening to people talk about the homeless population like they were statistics, not human beings. When it was his turn to speak, Thomas walked to the podium with shaking hands. He looked out at the sea of faces, mostly older, mostly white, mostly people who'd never missed a meal or slept on a park bench in their lives, and he told them the truth. I was 19 years old, Thomas began, and I had $17 to my name. I'd been homeless for almost 3 years, and I thought I knew what rock bottom looked like. But that December night, when I found Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell lost and confused in the freezing cold, I learned something important. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I learned that rock bottom isn't about how little you have. It's about how alone you feel. It's about believing that no one sees you, no one cares, no one would even notice if you disappeared. Thomas looked out at the audience. Eleanor Hartwell came from wealth and privilege. I came from poverty and homelessness. We couldn't have been more different. But that night, we were the same. Two people who needed help. Two people who needed to be seen. He told them about the cold, about the decision to stay, about wrapping Eleanor in his mother's blanket, about fighting to survive until morning. People always ask me why I didn't just call 911 and walk away, Thomas said. Why I risked my own life. And the answer is simple, because she needed someone to stay, and I was there. His voice grew stronger. But here's what I want you to understand. That night changed my life. It gave me a family, a home, opportunities I never could have imagined. But most homeless people don't get that kind of ending. Most of them die alone, or they survive, but they stay trapped in cycles of poverty and trauma. Thomas leaned forward, his hands gripping the podium. The systems we have now, they're built on the assumption that homeless people are broken and need to be fixed, that they're lazy or addicted or mentally ill. And sure, some struggle with those things. But you know what every single homeless person I've ever met struggles with? Being invisible, being treated like they're less than human, being told in 1,000 subtle ways that they don't matter. He looked directly at the policymakers in the front row. You want to solve homelessness? Then stop designing programs that treat people like problems to be managed. Start designing programs that treat them like human beings who deserve dignity, who deserve to be seen, who deserve someone who won't walk away. The speech went viral. Thomas's face appeared on news websites and social media. He got interview requests from major networks. The foundation's phone lines lit up with donors wanting to help. But the message that meant the most came from someone unexpected. It was an email from Mrs. Rodriguez, Thomas's 4th grade teacher, the one he barely remembered. Dear Thomas, she wrote, I saw your speech in Washington. I wanted you to know that I remember you. I remember a bright, kind boy who shared his lunch with classmates who forgot theirs, who helped other students with their homework even when he was struggling himself, who always had a smile, even though I knew things were hard at home with your mother being so sick. I lost track of you after elementary school, but I never forgot you, and I'm not surprised you grew into this remarkable young man. That kindness was always in you, Thomas. Your mother planted it deep. The world tried to take it, but you held on. That's the real miracle. Not that you survived, that you stayed kind. Thomas read the email 3 times, crying, and then forwarded it to William with a simple message. This is why we do the work. Thomas graduated in May with his bachelor's degree in social work. He was 23 years old, and he'd come further than he'd ever dreamed possible. William, Lily, and half the staff from the foundation came to the ceremony. When Thomas's name was called, they all stood and cheered so loudly that other families turned to look. Thomas walked across the stage, accepted his diploma, and looked out at the people who'd become his family. William, beaming with pride. Lily, now 15 years old, jumping up and down and waving. Patricia dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Rodriguez, his tutor, grinning from the crowd. In that moment, Thomas thought about his mother, about Eleanor, about every person who'd helped him get here. I did it, he thought. We did it. After graduation, Thomas was offered jobs at 3 different non-profits in 3 different cities. Good positions with good salaries,
opportunities to build a career. He turned them all down. Why? William asked when Thomas told him. These are excellent opportunities, especially the one in New York. Because the work is here, Thomas said simply. The foundation is here. The kids who need help are here. This is where I belong. So Thomas accepted a position as Director of Youth Services at the Eleanor Hartwell Foundation. It wasn't the highest paying offer he'd received, but it was the right one. He worked with kids who'd aged out of foster care, with teenagers living on the streets, with young adults trying to rebuild their lives after trauma and loss. And with each one, Thomas brought his own experience, his own understanding, his own refusal to give up on them. One afternoon in September, 4 years after that terrible December night, Thomas was in his office when he got a call from the front desk. "Thomas, there's someone here asking for you. Says his name is Marcus." Thomas went down to the lobby and found a young black man, maybe 17, standing nervously by the door. He was thin, wearing clothes that had seen better days, holding a backpack that looked like it contained everything he owned. "Marcus," Thomas said. "I'm Thomas. How can I help you?" "I saw you speak," Marcus said, "on YouTube, the speech in Washington, and I thought maybe." He trailed off looking uncertain. "Come on," Thomas said gently. "Let's go talk in my office." They walked upstairs together, and Thomas remembered being in Marcus's position, scared, alone, desperately hoping someone would see him. In his office, Marcus told his story. Aged out of foster care 6 months ago, been living in his car until it broke down, lost his job when he couldn't shower regularly, running out of options, running out of hope. "I know you probably can't help," Marcus said. "I know I'm just one more kid with the same story everyone has, but I saw your speech, and you talked about being seen, about mattering, and his voice broke. "I just need someone to see me." Thomas felt his eyes fill with tears. This could have been him. This was him 4 years ago. "I see you, Marcus," Thomas said firmly, "and we're going to help. That's what we do here." Over the next few months, Thomas worked with Marcus personally, got him into one of the foundation's housing units, helped him enroll in the GED program, connected him with a therapist to work through his trauma, found him a job at a local restaurant that was willing to work with his school schedule. It wasn't easy. Marcus had bad days where the trauma felt overwhelming, where he wanted to quit, to run, to give up. But Thomas was there, always there, refusing to walk away. "Why do you care so much?" Marcus asked one day, after a particularly rough session with his therapist. "Because someone cared about me," Thomas said, "and that made all the difference." By December Marcus had passed his GED. By spring he was enrolled in community college. By the following fall, he was thriving, working part-time, taking classes, even volunteering at the foundation to help other kids coming through the program. "You saved my life," Marcus told Thomas one day. "No," Thomas said. "You saved your own life. You showed up, you did the work, you didn't give up. I just gave you the tools." "You did more than that," Marcus insisted. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's what saved me." Thomas thought about William saying almost the exact same thing to him years ago. "Then pay it forward," Thomas said. "When you're on your feet, help the next person who needs it. That's how we change the world. One person at a time, one act of kindness at a time." On a cold December evening, exactly 5 years after that terrible night, Thomas stood in front of the mansion, where it had all happened. The foundation was hosting a fundraising gala, and the event planner had wanted to hold it somewhere special. William had offered the mansion. Now the place was filled with donors and board members, and young people who'd been helped by the foundation. Music played. People laughed and talked. Waiters circulated with trays of food and drinks. But Thomas found himself drawn outside, to the spot where he'd sat with Eleanor, where they'd fought to survive the night, where everything had changed. The bronze plaque was still there, gleaming in the light from the house, in memory of Eleanor Hartwell, who taught us that home is where someone waits for you, and family is who stays. "Still can't believe it's been 5 years, a voice said behind him. Thomas turned to find Lily standing there. She was 15 now, tall and confident, preparing for high school. She'd grown up so much. "Seems like yesterday," Thomas said, "and also like a lifetime ago." Lily came to stand beside him. You know what I think about sometimes? What? What would have happened if you'd walked away that night? If you'd decided saving yourself was more important than helping Grandma Eleanor? Thomas thought about that. About the shelter he'd been heading toward. About the life he would have continued living. Cold, hungry, alone, invisible. I think about it too, Thomas admitted. But then I remember what my mom taught me, that you can't always see where a choice will lead. You just have to do the right thing in the moment, and trust that it matters. It mattered, Lily said firmly. You mattered. You still matter. She hugged him, and Thomas hugged her back. This little sister who'd become one of the most important people in his life. William appeared in the doorway. There you are. People are asking for you, Thomas. They want to hear you speak. I should probably come in, Thomas said. In a minute, William said, coming outside to join them. He looked at the plaque, at the spot where Thomas had saved his mother. You know, I come out here sometimes, when I need to remember what's important, what really matters. What do you think about? Thomas asked. I think about how close I came to losing everything, William said. My mother, my humanity, my understanding of what it means to be a good person. He looked at Thomas. And I think about the incredible gift you gave us, not just saving my mother's life, but showing us how to live. He put his arm around Thomas's shoulders. You're my son, Thomas, in every way that matters, and I'm so proud of the man you've become. Thomas felt tears streaming down his face. I'm proud to be your son. They stood there for a moment, the three of them, this unlikely family built on one cold night, and the choice to stay instead of walking away. Inside, someone tapped on a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats. We're ready to begin the program. That's our cue, William said. They walked back inside together. The room was packed, over 200 people, all there to support the foundation's work. Thomas saw Marcus in the crowd, sitting with a group of other young people from the program. Saw Mr. Rodriguez, who still tutored for the foundation. Saw Dr. Reed from the college. Saw faces of people he'd helped, people who'd helped him, people who believed in the work. The foundation's board chair, a woman named Helen, who'd been with them since the beginning, took the podium. 5 years ago, Helen said, something remarkable happened in this house. A young man with nothing gave everything he had to save a stranger. That act of selfless kindness inspired the creation of the Eleanor Hartwell Foundation. And in 5 years we've helped over 800 young people transition from homelessness to stability. We've provided housing, education, job training, and most importantly, we've shown them they matter. She smiled at Thomas. Our director of youth services has lived the experience of homelessness. He knows what these young people are going through, because he's been there himself. He understands that the greatest gift we can give isn't just a bed or a meal, though those are important. It's dignity. It's being seen. It's having someone refuse to walk away. Helen gestured to Thomas. Thomas, would you come up and say a few words? Thomas walked to the podium, his heart pounding. He looked out at all these faces, all these people who'd come together because they believed in the mission. 5 years ago tonight, Thomas began. I was 19 years old and homeless. I had nothing. I was nobody. I was invisible. And then I found Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, lost and confused in the freezing cold, and I made a choice. I chose to stay. He paused, remembering that night, the cold, the fear, the exhaustion. I didn't know that choice would change my life. I didn't know it would lead to a family, a home, an education, a career helping others. I just knew someone needed help, and I was there. That's all. Thomas looked at William, at Lily, at the people in the crowd who'd been helped by the foundation. But here's what I've learned in 5 years of doing this work. That choice I made that night, that's the choice we all have to make, every single day. When we see someone struggling, someone in pain, someone who's been made invisible by society, we can walk away, or we can stay. We can protect ourselves, or we can reach out. We can hoard our resources, or we can share them. His voice grew stronger. My mother used to tell me that you're never poor if you still have kindness. She was right. Kindness is the one thing that costs us something and yet makes us richer. It's the one thing we can give away without losing. Thomas smiled. Eleanor Hartwell understood that. She spent her life giving, and even in her final years when Alzheimer's was stealing her mind, She taught us one last lesson. She taught us that being seen, being valued, being loved, that's what makes us human. That's what saves us. He looked around the room. This foundation exists because of one cold night and one impossible choice, but it continues to exist because of all of you, because you've made the same choice, to see people who are invisible, to stay when it would be easier to walk away, to believe that every single person matters. Thomas's voice cracked with emotion. Thank you for believing in this work. Thank you for believing in these young people, and thank you for proving, every single day, that kindness changes everything. The room erupted in applause. People stood. Thomas saw Marcus crying, saw William beaming, saw Lily wiping her eyes. After the speeches and the dinner and the dancing, after most people had left, Thomas found himself back outside. The December air was cold, but not like that night 5 years ago. Not dangerous, just crisp and clean and full of possibility. He heard footsteps behind him, and turned to find Marcus. "Hey," Marcus said, "mind if I join you?" "Not at all," Thomas said. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two young men who'd survived impossible things, looking at the spot where everything had changed. "I got my college acceptance letter today," Marcus said. "Full scholarship to state, social work program." Thomas felt pride surge through him. "Marcus, that's amazing. I want to do what you do," Marcus said. "Help kids like us. Be the person who doesn't walk away. You'll be great at it," Thomas said. "You already are." Marcus looked at the bronze plaque. "Do you think about that night a lot, about how different things could have been?" "Sometimes," Thomas admitted, "but mostly I think about how grateful I am. For Eleanor, for William, for Lily, for this chance to build a life worth living." He smiled. "My mom used to say that we can't always choose what happens to us, but we can choose what we do about it. I chose to help Eleanor. William chose to help me, and now we're all choosing to help others. That's how change happens. One choice at a time, one person staying instead of walking away," Marcus added. "Exactly," Thomas said. They stood there for a while longer watching the stars come out, thinking about choices and chances, and the strange ways life unfolds. Inside, through the windows, Thomas could see William and Lily laughing about something, Patricia fussing over the cleanup, the last few guests saying their goodbyes, his family, his home, his life, all because of one cold December night, one old woman lost in the snow, one impossible choice to stay instead of walking away. Thomas touched the bronze plaque one more time, thinking about Eleanor, about her wisdom and kindness, and the way she'd seen him when no one else had. "Thank you," he thought. "Thank you for being lost that night. Thank you for giving me the chance to be found." "Come on," Thomas said to Marcus. "Let's go inside. It's cold out here." "Yeah," Marcus agreed, smiling. "Let's go home." And together they walked into the warmth and light, two young men who'd been saved by kindness, ready to spend their lives passing it forward. Thomas Wheeler Hartwell stood at the front of a lecture hall at the State University, finishing his guest lecture for Dr. Ridd's Advanced Social Work Seminar. He was 29 now, working on his doctorate while serving as executive director of the Eleanor Hartwell Foundation. "People always ask me," Thomas said to the 200 students in the room, "why I gave everything I had that night to save a stranger, why I risked my life, and my answer is always the same: because that's what we're supposed to do. That's what makes us human." He looked out at the diverse group of students, some who'd lived easy lives, some who'd struggled, all of them preparing to enter a profession built on caring for others. It's not about grand gestures or heroic moments. It's about small choices made in critical moments, to stay or walk away, to help or ignore, to see people or look through them. Thomas smiled. Eleanor Hartwell wasn't a stranger for long. She became my grandmother. William became my father. Lily became my sister. That mansion became my home. But none of that would have happened if I'd walked away, if I'd chosen to save only myself. He paused. So when you face your moment, and you will face it, everyone does, ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be? The kind who walks away, or the kind who stays? After the lecture, a student approached, young, thin, with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. "Professor Wheeler Hartwell," the student said quietly, I need help. I aged out of foster care last month. I'm trying to stay in school, but I've been sleeping in my car, and I don't know how much longer I can." "Hey," Thomas said gently, putting a hand on the student's shoulder. "It's okay. We're going to figure this out together. Have you eaten today?" The student shook his head, eyes filling with tears. "Come on," Thomas said. "Let's get you some food, and then we'll talk about housing and resources and next steps. Sound good?" The student nodded, looking overwhelmed with relief. As they walked across campus together, Thomas thought about that cold December night 10 years ago, about Eleanor and William and Lily, about the family he'd found, about the life he'd built from nothing but kindness, and the refusal to walk away. "Why are you helping me?" the student asked. "You don't even know me." Thomas smiled, remembering asking William the same question. "Because someone once told me that you're never poor if you still have kindness," Thomas said. "And because nobody should have to be alone. Nobody should have to be invisible." "I felt invisible for so long," the student whispered. "I know," Thomas said. "I know exactly how that feels, but not anymore. We've got you now." That evening, after getting the student settled with immediate resources and a plan for the next steps, Thomas drove home, to the mansion that still held all his memories, to the family that had chosen him, and that he'd chosen right back. Lily was there, home from her sophomore year at college. She was studying to be a veterinarian, just like she dreamed as a little girl. William was in the kitchen cooking dinner. He'd become quite good at it over the years, finding joy in the simple act of feeding the people he loved. "How was the lecture?" William asked as Thomas came in. "Good," Thomas said. "Helped a kid after. Reminds me of me." "They all remind you of you," Lily said, looking up from her laptop with a smile. "That's why you're so good at what you do." After dinner, Thomas walked out to the front steps, to the spot where it had all happened. The bronze plaque gleamed in the porch light, in memory of Eleanor Hartwell, who taught us that home is where someone waits for you, and family is who stays. Thomas touched the plaque, as he did whenever he needed to remember, needed to reconnect with why he did this work. Still talking to her, Lily's voice came from behind him. Thomas turned and smiled. "Always." Lily came to stand beside him. "You know what I realized the other day?" "What?" "That night saved all of us. Grandma, Eleanor obviously, but also Dad. It reminded him what mattered. Me, it gave me a brother and showed me what real courage looks like. And you, it gave you everything. We saved each other," Thomas said. "That's what family does." They stood together watching snowflakes start to fall, gentle this time, beautiful, not the dangerous storm of 10 years ago. "I'm glad you found us that night," Lily said. "I'm glad you all found me," Thomas replied. Inside, William watched them through the window, his children, thinking about his mother, and how proud she would be, thinking about the strange miracle of that December night, thinking about how sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. The snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering the world in white, and Thomas stood there with his sister in front of his home, surrounded by love, living the life his mother had wanted for him. A life built on one impossible choice made on one impossible night, the choice to stay.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.